Hey guys, and welcome back to One Candle Society for another One Candle Paranormal Case File. Here with your host Vic Whaley.
And Marcus D. And a big shout out to our newest patron, Dan.
And a big thank you to all of our patrons who support us out there and allow us to make these videos.
And a big thank you to our fan War Hut for recommending this topic to us. If you guys would like to see a video done, don't forget, Season 5 is the year of the fan. So if you want to see us do a video, put it in the comments below, and maybe you'll see us do it.
Now come along with us on a journey to our inner mind as we search for Tulpas. Okay guys, we're going to have to start with something that we don't usually start with. That's a disclaimer, a big disclaimer. There are a lot of communities out there closely tied with Tulpas, and to tell you the truth, if you're part of one of those communities, if you're a Tulpamancer out there, you might want to skip this video. There are going to be things we're going to be talking about in here that you're probably just not going to like.
There's a lot of different things on our channel that's in the paranormal that's probably interesting for you guys. This episode probably is not going to be one of those.
And remember, we're viewing Tulpas through the lens of the paranormal here. And that is our goal on this channel, is to view things through the paranormal. So if that's not your thing, probably you're in the wrong place.
And another important thing to remember too, when we're going to be talking about Tulpas, we're going to be talking about them in the context that, what if they're real?
Yeah, and we're not talking about just real as a thought form. Real as in something that can interact with things, something that can potentially reach out. And I know that's not a perspective that everyone in the Tulpa community agrees with. Beyond that, if you do decide to listen to it and you take offense from it, we're not here trying to start a fight. If you want to put those comments below, that's fine. That's your prerogative. But don't expect us to probably engage. Maybe we will, but odds are we're just going to
probably
ignore
won't, yeah. But if you've stuck around this long on the video, get ready for a wild ride, guys. So if you don't know what a tulpa is, you've probably been confused this whole time as to what we're actually talking about. So we're going to start off by explaining exactly what a tulpa actually is.
A tulpa is a created thought form within yourself, basically creating a second personality and person within yourself.
Now, when most people have tried to explain what a tulpa is to other people, I've often heard the words, it's an imaginary friend that you created, but that's not exactly an accurate statement.
And that's assuming they don't say that that person's crazy, which is not our view.
Yeah, that's not view, yeah.
We do not think having a tulpa makes someone mentally ill.
Yeah, a tulpa is this, it's a sentient thought form, it's a sentient consciousness that you have an interpersonal relationship with. It has its own thoughts, it has its own feelings, its goals, its desires.
And since you are crafting this within your own mind, basically, for the most part, you get to determine what those are going to be, at least to a certain extent.
This could be anything from, say, just a normal person to a video game character, an anime character. It could even be something even more abstract, like, I don't know, a rain cloud with a face that follows you around.
And just as there's lots of different types of tulpas that one could create, there's a lot of different reasons people make them. And we're not just going to be talking about like the people who create them for companionship. There's a lot of different uses that people have used these for over the years.
So it's important when understanding like what a tulpa is, it's important to understand where a tulpa actually came from, because it's not a Western concept in the paranormal. It actually comes from the Eastern concepts.
Yeah, and it's hard to talk about tulpas without talking about Alexandria David Neel. She was a European lady who traveled to Tibet to kind of understand mysticism and magic within that context. She traveled there in 1929, and she did later produce a book on her travels called Magic and Mysticism in Tibet. Now, one of the things that she came upon when she was there was the idea of tulpas, and it's something that she became somewhat enamored with. And she's the first person to really bring this concept back to the West, as well as how she did it. One of the first things she talks about is what a tulpa was to her understanding. which was, this is a thought form that could be projected out of you that has the potential to physically interact within the real world and independently travel. These things are created by people, sometimes through intense meditation training, and sometimes through accident. They could also be created by divine beings, and that's how gods and powerful spirits would send emissaries to communicate with mortals, and that other supernatural creatures can create tulpas as well. Some of her first interactions with tulpas are kind of the more incidental ones. She tells about a story of one of her attendants named Wadu. And Wadu, he had left to go gather supplies for her, and he was very late coming back. She had a dream of him showing up in this strange Western hat, and sure enough, like the next day, they had spotted Wadu. And it turns out he went behind these rocks and just kind of vanished. This is her first interaction with a tulpa, and her conclusion is, well, Wadu had been thinking ahead of time about coming back and about how he was late. And when he does show up in this strange European hat too. So her perspective there is that since his mind's on it, he's accidentally sending a tulpa to where he's heading. Another interaction she has with a tulpa in the course of the book is she's being visited by a fairly well-known painter who paints these angry visages of the gods in wrathful states for the purposes of art. And while she's communicating with him, she notices that there's this tulpa following him around, just kind of as a misty visage of this enraged divine spirit. And she took the perspective there that this was likely a tulpa sent by a divine force to aid him through a form of inspiration by giving him the sort of sight into the divine to help him with his art. Another interaction she has with tulpas comes from a lama named Rinpoche, and I kind of hope I'm saying that name right, where she had communicated with this lama, but there was this odd habit of him showing up in the camp and communicating with her, and then sometimes just literally vanishing in front of her. This later she realized Rinpoche was a Tulpamancer, that Rinpoche could use his tulpa to go out into the world and communicate for him. And he would often send him to her instead of physically traveling to her to communicate things and mainly kind of just play some tricks on her because he's kind of a jokester sort of character. Now, eventually, David-Néel decided that she was going to create her own tulpa. So she sequestered herself for quite some time, at least a month, and just began the process of crafting the tulpa in her mind. And the tulpa she creates is kind of this rotund, jolly Eastern monk with kind of a Friar Tuck sort of personality, someone very nice and helpful. And she began to basically imagine him around, and then eventually it became a full-fledged tulpa. After that time, she left her seclusion and rejoined her group. But strange things started to happen from that point on. The tulpa, as it should, remained with her, remained a present part in her life, but over time, people started to remark about the strange monk that kept appearing in camp and then mysteriously disappearing, and several people traveling with her, as well as some strangers who were passing by, started to notice him. Also, her tulpa's appearance and form began to change. The tulpa began to look less rotund and more emaciated, started to take on a mean, scowling look, and just started to take on a very bitter and somewhat sinister personality to himself. Not long after that, the tulpa began being able to physically touch things. She could physically feel the tulpa's presence. Other people had physically felt the touch of the tulpa, not only just seeing it, like it was interacting with physical objects that were present there. And eventually when it got to the point where a visitor came by the camp and just was talking to her and the tulpa at the same time, believing both of them to be equally real, she's like, okay, that combined with me losing total control of this guy means something has to be done. And she begins this arduous kind of counter ritual to her initial ritual, as she begins slowly absorbing the tulpa back into her subconscious. And according to her writings, he put up quite a fight. He didn't want to go through this process, which I guess would be understandable. Yeah. But eventually she does subdue this tulpa after a great deal of stress and hardship put on her because of this. She then returned to Europe and wrote her book, and that's how we get a lot of our initial exposure to tulpas.
So when you're talking about tulpas, you go out and initially look at tulpas, you will get a lot of the story that says that tulpas are just this imaginary friend that you just create for companionship. That's what you're initially get. But tulpas, they're beyond that. There's actually different groups of people that make tulpas for different reasons, right?
Oh yeah, the initial ones are the Tibetan practice, which for the most part you use it for a process of becoming enlightened, or to become more in touch with yourself, or to become more of an empowered person. Like you may use the tulpa to show negative aspects of your character, so you could see how comical those are, or you could use it to show a counter to your weaknesses, to give yourself an example of how you can overcome them. And the idea is that you use it as this mental exercise, and then after you've achieved what you needed through with the tulpa, you then reabsorb it into you.
So say I have an initial fear of spiders. Like I'm afraid of spiders. It's a crippling fear of spiders. How would you use spiders in that practice to overcome? Like how would you use tulpas for that?
Well, what you could do is you could go one way of creating a tulpa that's just pulled purely out of your fear of spiders. So you have this tulpa who's hyper afraid of spiders. So you see those aspects of yourself acting in such absurd ways, you're like, oh, is this what's in me? Is this what's going on? I need to change this part of me. Or you could go the other direction and say, make a tulpa that's extremely not afraid of spiders. Like maybe even curious about them, playful with them, showing that you can have part of yourself that can engage in such a way.
It's kind of like an even more advanced thing of like when we watch ourselves on TV or we listen to our voices, we're like, oh my God, do I look and do I sound like that? I need to be making a change.
Yeah, it's almost like looking at a caricature of yourself and going, I don't want to be that caricature.
Like, I can do better.
Now, modern occult practitioners also utilize tulpas, and this is in a different sort of traditional wing. They often create simple tulpas, which they generally refer to as servitors, or even egregores, where multiple people come together to work on a singular tulpa. And they'll do so for a variety of reasons. Many people will talk about creating servitors for very simple tasks, like, I need to get up at a certain point, so I'm going to create this separate thought form to kind of do that for me. Or, I need to gather energy, so I'm going to create this thought form to go out and gather energy for me. It's usually very simple, only capable of simple tasks. You're basically doing the tulpa process, but stopping before you give it any real personality or power. Other practitioners of the occult will create more full-fledged tulpas to do certain things like this. Like, say, if you're a gifted healer, you can have that tulpa now travel to a place and use your gifts of healing on someone, or use it to kind of screw over someone you don't like, have it go to give someone bad dreams or to deliver a curse on your behalf. But for as many different people as there's that many different tulpas and that many different ways to utilize them. But the focus of the occult practitioners for the most part seems to be more bent on the practicality of using a tulpa as a tool. Some of them will also use it as a way of divine worship, where they create a tulpa of a deity, and then they feed that tulpa deity the worship that they wish to give it. Beyond that, probably one of the most interesting uses for tulpas in the modern occult that I found is to use them for protection. Say, for example, if you're plagued by shadow people or a poltergeist, occult practitioners will sometimes create tulpas for the specific purpose of keeping them safe. Specifically, many people have used the example of while they're asleep. This seems to come with mixed results, as many people seem to have reported like a fair deal of success. Although I did find one account where it went really bad, where a girl had created a tulpa and then she had gone to this haunted place, and her tulpa basically got ripped apart by shadow people and just pretty much totally wrecked, to the point where the only time she sees her tulpa is if she goes back to that location, and the tulpa wants nothing to do with her, will just run and scream, and will occasionally visit her in her dreams to tell her, hey, you created me as a life, and then you ruined me. I am destroyed because of your negligence. Which is a pretty sad ending to that tale. Yeah. So I've heard some mixed results on using them for defense.
I mean, that's like one of the heaviest things that comes from tulpas is you're making a consciousness for the sake of something.
Yeah, you're basically creating a person that has a somewhat limited amount of autonomy.
Yeah, with emotions and feelings, and sometimes those emotions can be negative, and sometimes they can get hurt.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that brings us to the modern tulpa.
So modern tulpas and modern tulpamancers, people that make tulpas, they tend to make tulpas for the purpose of companionship. They want a companion. Now that companion could be a romantic companion. It could be a familial companion in some sort of way. Or it could be a friend or a life coach in some sort of way. Typically the modern tulpamancer has some sort of social need that is not being filled, so they turn to a tulpa to fill that void in their lives.
And probably an important thing to point out at this point is that, well, for the most part, modern tulpamancers do not seem to recognize a mystical side to this.
No, they don't.
It's a psychological exercise where they teach themselves to induce a hallucination of this person and then maintain a certain degree of control over that hallucination.
And modern tulpamancers don't even think of their tulpas as something that can manifest as something that other people can see. Most modern tulpamancers see tulpas as something that at best can manifest in that they can only see it, or maybe even only being limited to actually talking to them in their mind. So this is where I start having some concerns with what it comes to making a tulpa.
Yeah, I think I'm with you there. If we look at it as purely this is a thought form, I guess it does negate some of it, but many people come into creating a tulpa with specific sort of goals, and if you do believe this to be a real person, as many both occultic and modern practitioners do consider these to be real individuals unto themselves, it kind of has a slavey sort of vibe.
Yeah, it does. And because again, when it comes to modern tulpas, you're making something to fill a need for you, and the only thing that you can really provide to these tulpas is a space for them to live in your mind. If you're a modern tulpamancer,
and like you kind of feed them with your attention.
Yeah, and attention. Like the thing is like, you're making them to fill this need, but what if they don't want to fill that need?
Yeah, it seems like at least initially that's not a problem. The initial tulpa generally seems to come out more or less doing what it wants, but it seems like they build more autonomy over time.
Like, and if you go onto like modern tulpamancers, their websites, their forums, you read their literature. I mean, I genuinely believe that they're coming from this concept of I'm making something real. I'm creating a real sentient being. And when you do something like that, but you're only having it inside this box that it can't ever get out of, and it can't go anywhere, that doesn't sit well with me.
One of the big issues I see is, let's assume that you only believe it to be a thought form, which I'm not totally convinced. I actually think that it can probably go beyond that. But even if you do think about it just as a second person you're creating within your mind, for the most part, you're creating at best a proxy person for you to use to fill whatever hole you have that you feel like you need accomplished. At worst, you're creating your own individual person who shares headspace with you that is basically coming in with a preset to fulfill a certain goal. But the thing is, pretty much universally, tulpamancers talk about how tulpas grow and experience new things and evolve themselves as they go along, becoming more an affirmed individual. And as you become a more affirmed individual, just like humans when they're learning to walk and talk and explore the world, you want to push beyond your normal boundaries. But that creates some serious difficulties when you have two consciousnesses sharing a singular body.
I mean, put yourself in a Tulpa's place for a moment. Imagine all of a sudden you're inside a box and you hear a voice somewhere talking to you. And at this point, you don't know anything exists outside that box. But the more the voice talks to you, the more you start to realize what's your surroundings, and you start growing. And then all of a sudden, there comes to you this point, the only thing you know is this voice. And then one day, you realize there is more outside this box. What would you do?
I would want to know how much more is outside the box. I'd want to push that boundary.
Yeah, your whole world, you realize there's this whole world outside your box. But then all of a sudden, you get to this limitation with how modern Tulpamancers interpret Tulpas, that you can't get outside the box. You can't get away from the box. You're tethered to the box. Your whole world starts to become, how do I get away from the goddamn box?
And like some Tulpamancers create like this world space inside their head for their Tulpa to go to. At that, I would say I would still want to get into the world of reality.
Yeah.
Just saying, me as a grown, affirmed individual, I want to push the borders and get to the real world. And if they grow similar to us, I feel like their natural curiosity is going to cause them to go through very similar routes.
You know, and a person that comes to a point where they feel the only type of a companion that they can really that they want is one that they create. And then now all of a sudden, here's this thought form that's given sentience that doesn't know the world outside of the box very much. How healthy of a relationship can that really be? I mean, I can't see how that doesn't turn into a horrendously toxic environment and a horrendously toxic relationship.
To Tulpamancers out there, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. You do you, and I'll do me. But at the same time, if you're at the point where you're creating a separate individual inside your head to show you how to achieve certain goals, something might have gone wrong along that path.
A Tulpamancer will tell you that the only thing that a Tulpa can do are things that a Tulpamancer himself can do. So if you're making a Tulpa as a companion and you believe that you can create a healthy relationship with this Tulpa, that leads me to believe that you have the ability to create healthy relationships outside of this Tulpa.
Okay, I know that you've been doing a lot of research on what goes on the boards and trying to get an inner perspective on it. So what all have you found from that?
So what Tulpamancers will tell you is that there is this healthy relationship between them and their Tulpas. Okay, so I went to look to see, is that true? I watched multiple interviews between, people interviewing Tulpamancers and Tulpas. It's a huge population on Reddit and other forum boards. So I went there and I just looked at all of the threads and I looked how people are talking, and there's this just weird dichotomy that's going on there. Tulpamancers will tell you, I'm creating this companion. They're a healthy friend for me. They're there for me. They help me through these things. But if you ever actually pay attention to what Tulpas say about their Tulpamancers.
And people can have their Tulpas basically move through them and post stuff. Yeah. Just to clarify that part out.
It's rarely positive. Go watch interviews with them. Several interviews that I watched talked about the Tulpa referring to their Tulpamancer. They would put down their physical appearance. I watched one where a lady just ripped apart her Tulpamancer's personality. She put down her sense of style. There were Tulpas that talked about they have to be more in charge. They got to be the consciousness that's in charge because their Tulpamancer can't handle certain situations. there was one point where I started asking myself, well, what happens if a Tulpamancer doesn't want their Tulpa around anymore? Go out there and try to find that answer, because it's not an easy one to find. In fact, the only answer that I found was the reverse. I found a forum post that was a Tulpa that was asking, how do I get rid of my host permanently?
Which is an extremely scary thing to read.
It is. Go watch it. Tulpas generally don't seem to be referring in any sort of positive sense. On top of more of that, you see many modern Tulpamancers creating multiple Tulpas, where instead of needing more people in their life, they're saying, no, there's more Tulpas in the mind than human consciousnesses. So at a certain point, this starts building to some very scary thoughts for me. You start asking yourself, if you have all of these Tulpas that are being created and confining in these boxes, and they're trying to get outside their box, and they don't have a very positive opinion on their hosts, where does this start leading to? It starts leading to where many modern Tulpamancers are doing, where they refer to it as switching, which is essentially where the Tulpa is in charge, the main consciousness that's piloting the body, essentially possessing their body.
And many Tulpamancers go into this with a goal of possession.
They see this lack of a problem in this self, and they use the Tulpa as a means of doing this. Or in some instances, I've seen the Tulpa is just saying, no, you can't handle this. You need me to do this. I need to do this for you. Let me do this.
And a lot of Tulpamancers do this switch or possession to achieve certain goals. Like there's one person in a review was like, I need to exercise more, but I don't like to exercise. So I switch to my Tulpa, and my Tulpa exercises my body for me.
So at a certain point, the Tulpa is the one taking charge of doing all of these things and doing all of these things for the host. And
it makes sense how these toxic relationships where the perspective of the Tulpa is fairly toxic toward the perspective of the host. Yeah. I think this makes tons of sense.
Yeah. Like they're doing it for you. They're not encouraging you to do it. They're the ones getting you to do it. And the main thing that a Tulpa needs from its Tulpamancer is attention. But now the Tulpa is now piloting the body, now controlling the body, interacting with people around them, getting attention from other people.
Although I have seen people say that it's still you in control. It's still you. It's just you're acting as your Tulpa at that point. But that doesn't seem to be anywhere near a consensus within the Tulpamancer community. I've seen several posts and several people talking about, my Tulpa keeps doing things that I don't want it to do with my body. How do I stop it? That means your autonomy. I'm gonna emphasize that. Your autonomy at that point has been given over to someone else, and they're utilizing your body in a way you don't want it to be utilized. As someone who's involved in the field of the paranormal, going into anything with the goal of possession is a terrible idea, and giving it over willingly seems like an even worse, and assuming that these people can be believed, it sounds like they're losing control. If they don't know how to stop a Tulpa from doing something with their body, this sounds like a situation that's already beginning to spiral out of control.
And it kind of is already spiraling out of control. I was researching, this morning before this video, and I'm like, I want to go refresh kind of like, what a little bit more about their literature and what they say. So I go on the main Tulpa, website that you can get to from their Reddit, and the very first 4 articles on their website is all about possession and switching. How the Tulpa can run the body, how they can do this. And they say stuff like, make sure you're talking with your host and you're demanding time to be piloting. Don't ask. Don't let them say, oh, I'll let you do something. They're like, set a time. Be firm about it. Make sure that you're getting your time to run this thing. Go to that website. You will find almost zero literature on there for how that help the Tulpamancer through any of their problems. It is all about how to get your Tulpamancer to let you pilot the body more, why it's important to give your Tulpa attention, and how to convince the Tulpamancer's loved ones that this is okay.
Now, I know this is not the case for every single Tulpamancer. We're talking about specific cases. But even if these cases exist as a minority, this is still something that is a very serious issue. To anyone out there, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. You do you, I'll do me, and whatever. But if you are going into this practice and you're recognizing the fact that this thing can potentially take control of me and potentially force me to do things against my will, which I know not everyone agrees is a possibility, but it does seem to jive with a lot of things we've read, this should be a big red flag. This should be a big danger sign right there. I would not personally ever give myself up to possession of any way, shape, or form, because A, it sounds dangerous as hell, and B, I really prize my personal autonomy. I really prize the fact that I am in control of my body and I have the freedom to do certain things. I wouldn't risk that for anything.
I see a lot of parallels between making a Tulpa and making artificial intelligence. You're making essentially this sort of intelligence. And when you look at most modern artificial intelligence studies, I go back to this one study that I read where it was the scientists, they set two artificial intelligence like programs in front of each other. One had, I think it was apples, the other one had oranges, and they set them up to communicate with each other, and then they let them go. The very first thing that the artificial intelligence computers did was ditch English, by the way, and they started adopting their own language, and they started trading things, and the scientists weren't exactly sure what each computer was offering the other, and it got to a certain point, they didn't understand what those intelligences were doing with each other, to the point where they had to shut it off. And can you really blame them?
Anything that has intelligence in itself is going to try to grow beyond its current situation. Now, keep in mind, we're talking about this from the paranormal perspective. Mm-hmm. I'm going to give a lot of weight to those early views of tulpamancy and what a tulpa can do and what a tulpa is. I'm also going to put weight on modern experiences with tulpas. And based on at least a subsection of the people involved, these things are capable of doing some serious stuff as far as impacting your personal freedom. And if they have all the incentive to try to take control, and they have the means to potentially take control, I think if they get to the point where they want to, and you allow them to get strong enough to, I feel like the natural consequence, the natural evolution, is they're going to try to take control.
And I will concede the argument that I do think that it is possible for a person with a strong enough willpower to create a tulpa for a benevolent means. I think that that is possible. However, I think the person with the willpower to be able to do that won't need to. You know, I think they're not going to be the kind of person that I think that's going to be turning to a tulpa for that sort of companionship, for that sort of that need. I think that kind of person is going to be looking outside of that to people around them.
Can I play devil's advocate for a moment?
Sure, that's kind of where we're going.
I can think of a situation where a potential me could create a tulpa.
Okay.
And do you know what the reasoning would be?
What?
To determine if it legitimately works. Out of pure curiosity, I could potentially see, don't worry, I'm not going to, guys. Mm-hmm. I could potentially see a version of me that would attempt to make a tulpa, just to find out if it's possible, to understand the mechanism behind it.
And I believe that.
But knowing what I know, knowing its history, I would say the risk is just too much. Yes, perhaps I would learn something about tulpas. Perhaps I'd learn something about myself, and I would understand better how they work and that they can actually be created. But for the most part, I believe they can be created. I don't need to engage in something like that. And truthfully, I don't need someone else to help me learn the inner workings of my own mind and who I am, because I enjoy kind of learning that on my own. Kind of, by going out and experiencing the world around me, not the world within me.
I know that people say, I'll make one to see if I can do it. But if you look at how people are being encouraged to make it, it is several hours a day that you sit in meditation trying to make one of these things. Imagine sitting and putting hours and hours of your thought, your emotional energy into something. And then finally it happens. You're going to get attached to that. All of a sudden, if you really start to think about it, like, we start to lose, objective perspective when we put that much of our energy into something. So would you really be able to think objectively when you're thinking about what should I be doing with something like this?
I think it's really telling the way many tulpas communicate about their Tulpamancers, especially the ones that are looking to get rid of what they often see as a toxic force in what they now consider to be their lives. And keep in mind, to the Tulpa's perspective, whether you consider this to be a thought form you created or a paranormal entity that you've created, to them this is their lives.
Now I'm gonna play not devil's advocate, but I'm gonna play kind of the devil in this context. Okay, you're a person that's creating a tulpa for the purposes of companionship. Okay, you need that sort of companionship, that you don't think highly of yourself enough that you could go out and find this thing. Do you really think that a tulpa is then going to be satisfied just with interacting with you?
I mean, if it's already based off you, it's likely going to go through a similar process as you did and start wanting to interact with things, wanting to reach out more, and searching for companionship that it can self-determine.
If you hate you, why would it like you? So.
Which, of course, and we're not saying is the case for every Tulpamancer.
I don't.
But this is the case for many Tulpamancers have specifically said that this is more or less their scenario, though.
Yeah. But to me, again, I'm a very positive guy in real life. So here's my thing. I don't think a person really actually needs to ever get to that point. There's 8 billion people in this world, okay? Trust me. There is somebody out there in this world, in this day and age, with the internet that you can reach out to that will appreciate you for being you. I don't think you have to create this construct in order to find somebody that appreciates you. Eventually, you're going to come along and you're going to find your own Vic Waitley that enjoys all of your all of your eccentricities and lets you be you and doesn't judge you in a way and pushes you and challenges you and helps you grow as a person. Okay.
Well, first, a little bit of judgment. It's eccentricities.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, snap.
But again, it took me almost 20 years to find that. So of course, it may be hard, but it is very possible. And I encourage nobody to give up and continue to find people that make you a better person, and that whenever, they're referring to you, they refer to you in a positive light. Not somebody who looks down upon you.
Are we ready to go into our personal thoughts?
I am. You go first.
Okay. When it comes to Tulpamancy as a whole, I get the old school sense of creating a tulpa to better understand yourself. It's not something I would do, but I understand it as a meditative practice. And I do appreciate that whole thing at the end where you reabsorb it, because to me this sounds like you've created a paranormal entity with abnormal powers, particularly since there are enough accounts of them being able to actually affect the physical world for me to say it's a possibility for at least some of them to do it. I appreciate the fact they're reabsorbing them into themselves. It's not my style, but I understand that it's out there and I get it. Occultic creators of Tulpas. I get it, you want to have your familiar-esque sort of creature that can kind of go out and help you out with things. And they seem to mainly view it as a tool. And I get that. It's whatever. It would not be my style. It seems very dangerous to be using them as defense because, like I said, I've read stories where the Tulpa's life just gets ruined. And this isn't Pokemon battles. Shadow people, and I guess they can apparently be dangerous because in that account, these shadow people wrecked that thing, kind of corrupted it, and basically gave it a terrible life. And it made sure its host knew that it had ruined its life. I think it's negligent, but once again, I get it. I understand the thought process that can lead you here. And like all these, it's a you do you scenario. This is definitely not for me. It sounds like you have the potential of ruining someone's life in the process. When it comes to modern Tulpamancy, man, I, for the most part, just don't really get it. It seems like, but I'm one of those people, I would never go into something with the viewpoint of it ending with the purposes of possession. That just is such an anathema to my beliefs and my views. So that's just a road I personally would never travel down. For those people out there just creating simple tulpas, I guess odds are, whether you believe it to be true, I think it's likely a supernatural entity. It's likely has its own feelings and stuff. I know not everyone's going to agree with me there. But even if it is just in your mind, you're giving a person a very limited world, and you're not crazy for doing it. You're not mentally ill, but it doesn't sound like the most healthy thing in the world. And if you really believe this is a person, would you want to be a person put in those sort of confinements? I think most people would agree that you probably wouldn't when you really think it out. But like I've been saying throughout this video, I'll do me, you do you, but I'll be doing me a lot better knowing that you might think about it a little bit.
All right, I'm gonna assume your opinion on us is that ship's already sailed for any like salvaging on that. I'm just gonna say, if any being that is created, its natural goal is to grow and expand its world. So for whatever means that you're gonna create a tulpa, it can't help but probably want to grow outside of the confines of for what it was originally made for. You have to think about what's the next step. Where is this eventually going to go? So I want you to think about this. You've created an intelligence with your mind. Somebody else is creating intelligence with their mind. What are just beings inclined to do? We're social creatures. We're inclined to reach out and find other things like us. Why wouldn't tulpas try to reach out to each other and create something for themselves? You know, if all of a sudden these tulpas start waking up and start realizing that there are others like me out there, what does that mean? What is a tulpa? I know I was made for this, but could it be something more? What do I think a tulpa is for? And then groups of them start getting together, and then the tulpas as a group start maybe thinking, what's our culture? What are we as a group? What do we do? I don't see how they wouldn't try to come together to form their own sense of a culture. And what's any culture going to try to do? Preserve itself and grow. You know, and I think that there's really strong evidence of that when you look at the tulpas as a community. I mean, can you think of any other paranormal entity that's got its own subreddit where it talks as itself? I don't see one with Bigfoot. I don't see one for shadow people. I see one for tulpas. I spent a lot of time looking at tulpas literature, and you know, what am I seeing when I read some of the literature on tulpas? If you go onto their website and you start reading their stuff, all of their stuff said, is there any reason not to make a tulpa? And the answer is no. We've left several reasons in this video as to why that might be a bad thing. In their literature, they ask questions. is it okay with people with mental illnesses to make tulpas? And they say it's fine. I think even a rational person can understand why there may be issues with a person trying to induce a hallucination or induce or spend that much time reflecting inside their mind. If you ask the question of can tulpas manifest outside their body, it wasn't that long ago we know that people are claiming yes, they can manifest outside their body. There seems to be so much misinformation on their websites. How can that not be intentional? So if they're saying there's no reasons not to make these, there's no reason to limit yourself this is completely okay. To me, that sounds like a culture that's trying to grow. That sounds like a group of things that are trying to grow. Where does that lead us? But I'm going to leave that for you guys to discuss that in the comments below.
Thank you guys for checking out our video on tulpas. I really hope you enjoyed it, and I hope a flame war isn't about to begin in our comments section.
Yeah, I know, guys, that there was a lot of heated dialogue that went on in there, but this is a very intense subject, and I don't think it's been given enough the passion to discuss about it as much as it should.
Yeah, when this became a suggestion to us, we both dove headlong into here, and we have so many thoughts on the subject that it was hard to compile into like just one train of thought to deliver to you guys.
Yeah.
It was a challenge.
Yeah, we thought this could have been 2 videos, and I know I'm already getting into the comments because I know we didn't bring it up in the video. Well, what about Slender Man? He's probably in Tulpa. I'm like, you know what? I'm so far beyond that concept of Slender Man being a thing. I'm sorry. I'm just beyond that. I'm thinking about so many other things with this topic.
Also, Slender Man would probably be an egregore.
Either
But
way,
pretty similar.
yeah. I mean, yeah, you could say that. That's probably a good example. But there's way more to this than just talking about Slender
And you know what,
Man.
guys? We might come back to this topic one day, but this has been a fairly mentally exhausting process here. Like, we both had to talk each other down from the ledges.
Yeah, so many times. You know, when you come at it from the paranormal of, you know, not is this real, but this is real. We're gonna talk about it. It leads you to some weird thoughts.
Like, we didn't even get into, like, could there be a deep inner conspiracy urging us to make tulpas? We didn't get into, could this be demons trying to trick us into easy possession? There's a lot of places we literally could have gone with this, but we just wanted to give you guys something in a packageable bite.
Is it moral to even get rid of a tulpa once you've already made one? There's so much more we could have gone into.
And maybe we will someday.
You know, but definitely not today. But again, remember, guys, this is your FUB. This is You're the Fan. This was a fan requested video. We hope we delivered what they want. So leave your video requests below. We'll definitely try to do them. But until next time, guys, keep believing.
Because we'll keep listening.